Good morning, and thank you for joining me for a review of a book that is really quite amazingly good in virtually every sense. The Lost World by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Now, I actually finished this book a couple of days ago, but A, work, busy, etc., and B, I wanted to reread the good bits. So for the last couple of days, I've been picking it up, reading a bit, and putting it down. So let's start with the author. We all know Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, let's face it. The second I said Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, anyone listening this probably, the neurons fired and went, Sherlock Holmes, because that's what he's mostly known for. And Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, not Conan Doyle, his surname was actually just Doyle apparently, was famously said that he was hoping that the Lost World would do for boys' adventure what Sherlock Holmes had done for detective novels. And I think arguably it did. From the internet, I understand that the Lost World was based heavily on the Jules Verne Journey to the Centre of the Earth and some of Ron Haggard's work like She, etc. And it is a marvellous, marvellous story, and it is beautifully written. So Arthur Conan Doyle, of course, was a great writer. Beautiful, beautiful narrative. A man of letters, he was called in his obituary. And that beautiful writing comes through very much in this book, which makes what is, in some ways, essentially an adventure story into a marvellous experience of literature. So Arthur Conan Doyle himself was a fascinating, fascinating guy. Every time I happen to reread anything about him, I'm amazed once again at everything he did. He was known as a British writer, but he was also a physician, studied as a physician. He studied many other aspects of science of his day, such as botany. I think his first, I could be wrong about this, but I believe his first non-fiction published thing was a treatise on a particular poison, which related to an actual poisoning case happening in the United Kingdom at the time. He was a politician, a traveller. He travelled including to Australia and New Zealand. An incredibly diverse man. He did all the things that a British gentleman did in his time. He played all the sports, which is reflected in The Lost World, and he was involved in politics, and he was involved in human rights, and he twice investigated cases where serious miscarriage of justice was about to occur, and apparently the Court of Criminal Appeal may be partly based on his efforts. Anyway, fascinating guy. The Lost World is meant to be the first book in which the character of Professor Challenger appears. There are others, apparently. But The Lost World starts with Edward D. Malone, who is the first person narrator of the whole book. He's a reporter at the Daily Gazette, and described as of Irish background. I think that probably meant more to Doyle's readers at the time of publication, which I do believe was 1921, so later in his writing career. Describing someone of Irish background or descent probably meant something more to them than it does to me. And he's also an athletic man around town. He is also courting a young lady who sounds like a right twit. Unfortunately, the only female in the book, but think of when it was written. I don't have a problem with it. If you do, there's plenty of other books you can read with lots of females, mostly females. So, he's courting this female by the name of Gladys. She wants a man like Sir Richard Burton. It's amazing how once you read about Sir Richard Burton, his name and his story keeps cropping up everywhere. She wants someone like that, an adventurer who's made his life and his name, and any woman who marries him will gain by association. She sounds like a complete moron to me, but I'm going to blame hormones, but Edward Malone is fixated on her, and he goes racing back to his editor at the Daily Gazette, whose name I believe was McArdle, something like that, demanding to be sent on a dangerous adventure to some part of the globe, or pursuing something dramatic that will recommend him to his silly twit back home. His editor isn't keen on this because of, expenses. There's not a lot of percentage in a newspaper paying for expensive expeditions for reasonably young, reasonably untried reporters. But it does come to his mind that there is one character in London at the time, I'm going to say London, I believe so, who a number of people have tried to interview. He hates reporters. Mostly it's ended in punches. And this, of course, is our hero, Professor George Edward Challenger. He is described as a zoologist. No, he's described as a scientist. We would call him a zoologist and an adventurer. But like all the science people at the time, they didn't really just do one science. They did science across the board. So a bit of zoology, a bit of botany, a bit of exploring, all the things. So our young Edward invents the character of a student of science who seeks an interview with Professor Challenger at his house. He goes there. He believes he's doing a good job impersonating someone who's interested in science, but he's doing a shocking job. And Professor Challenger, who's described as this large, burly, rough and tumble almost guy with a huge bushy beard, an irascible nature and volatile intent, ends up taking our Edward, hitting him a few times and throwing him out on the street. A policeman, having observed this and having observed similar altercations from the same address in the past, comes up and asks if Edward wants to press charges. Edward doesn't, and this interests Professor Challenger, who takes him back into the house and tells him something of the story. Now, the reason Professor Challenger has been so ridiculed in the entire London scientific world is that he came back from South America claiming to have found a lost land in which dinosaurs and so forth exist. His evidence is not extensive. It includes a sketchbook and diary by a previous American who must have died somewhere in South America, leading him to the actual site. And it includes a sketch of, I think it's a stegosaurus. Probably. A dinosaur. Just say dinosaur. And there's a few other things that he's got, including photos. But the British scientific community believes the photos to be faked. During this interview with Professor Challenger, Edward is finally convinced that everything he's saying is true. So he's been sent by his editor to debunk this man, but in fact, he finds himself unable to do so. And he ends up going to a scientific meeting the next day in which Challenger is going to present his views once again. Challenger is presented as a real annoying person. You could say worse. And it's not really surprising that people aren't believing him because he's being so unpleasant about it. It's like a lot of their doubts are not unworthy of taking seriously, but Professor Challenger takes nothing seriously except himself, and that becomes very obvious throughout the book. During this riotous scientific meeting, Professor Challenger is largely needled, ridiculed, and held up as a fraud by a group of people, but mostly led by Professor Summerlee. And the end result of that meeting is that a new expedition is going to be sent into South America to directions to be provided by Professor Challenger to validate or invalidate his reports. And by the end of the meeting, the person leading it is Professor Summerlee, who is described as rather goat-like, and Edward Malone is desperate to accompany them and is selected as a non-scientific impartial observer, and the third member of this expedition is going to be Lord John Roxton, who is a skilled big game hunter and a really excellent character. Now, these guys all depart for South America with a letter to be opened with the final directions only when they get there. And that takes up, I'm going to say, a very good proportion of the book. So we're talking about not quite 100 pages out of a 248-page book is the build-up. And many authors would not be able to pull that off. For many people who want to read about the Lost World and, dinosaurs, those 80 or 90 pages would be annoying. But the beauty of the writing, he's got such a turn of phrase, such a man of letters accreditation, that the actual act of reading even a description of someone walking down the street is delightful. Another thing that Sir Arthur Conan Doyle does apparently effortlessly, but certainly very dramatically, is characters. Every single character who appears here, even if it's just for walking on during a breakfast in the hacienda in South America and then walking back out again, every character reads like an actual human being, rounded, interesting, of interests, of having their own visual cues and speech characteristics. There is not any point at which, if you're reading a statement made by any character, you could really mistake it for any other character. This is an author that doesn't need to resort with, Edward said, then Professor Challenger replied. He can do it without needing, he can do it from the inside out, I suppose you'd say. Brilliant, brilliant writing. And it was only when we finally reach a little map at around about page 90, the outlying pickets of the New World, chapter 8 is when they reach South America. Only then did I realize we hadn't actually got anywhere yet, and I really didn't care. It was just too good. The whole experience was too good. Now, of course, The Lost World is in the public domain. We all know a bit about it. Probably many other people have read it, so it's not really spoilery to say too much about what happens, because the actual reading experience, the beauty of it, is the main thing that's happening there. So Professor Challenger actually joins them in South America and leads them directly to the Lost World that he has previously discovered. And we've got this group of 4, with including bearers and Indian bearers, a South American black guy who's leading their bearer group. I don't know. The way it's described is essentially that on the trail leading there, they've got 2 fires, one where the white people sit and the other one where the other guys sit. So yes, it's dated. It's written in 1921 or something. So yeah. Some of those characters aren't incredibly developed, but they don't exist extensively. It's the 4 main guys who eventually make it up to the plateau through an ingenious device that Professor Challenger thinks up. It takes them a while to find the way to get to the plateau. They do find the place where the previous American explorer who'd been there, Maple White, got there, but it's been blocked off, so they can't use that and they have to hunt for a new one. Now, up to this point, we've got a lot of satire of the British scientific community. I'm told that this was a very intentional satire because Sir Arthur Conan Doyle was frustrated often by scientific conventions and the people within the science community. So for all this journey, we've got up South America, and I love the journeying descriptions. I've read a few other books about South America and its zoology, so this is great. Professor Challenger and Professor Summerlee are constantly at odds. Summerlee doesn't believe a word of anything that Challenger has said. He's loving the trip. He's enjoying the insects and the botany and finding all these new things. And Challenger and Summerlee often debate about science, which is a great way for the reader to learn more about the science that Doyle clearly knew so much about. Through them debating and arguing, we as scientists get a very rounded picture of who they are and the world around them and the state of science at the time. Now, having made it to the plateau, everyone else has seen enough signs to suggest to them that something weird is happening. They've seen a bird in the distance, which Summerlee dismisses as a stork, but which our Lord John Roxton, who is a skilled big game hunter and has been all over the world, including extensively to South America, he knows it's not a stork. He doesn't know it's a pterodactyl for sure, but he knows it's not a stork. Summerlee insists it is, until a few nights later, when sitting around the campfire I mentioned earlier, roasting some game that they've caught on it, a huge, leathery, winged, flying beast rips out of the sky, grabs up their dinner and flies off. So having seen a pterodactyl right in front of him, as it were, Summerlee apologises in true British gentleman style to Challenger. They keep on arguing with each other throughout the book, but that acknowledgement of error is quite delightfully written. Once they get up to the top of the plateau, they are accidentally marooned there. Not accidentally. They are unintentionally marooned there by a betrayal of one of their bearers, and that is due to Lord John Roxton's past of getting rid of slavers in South America. Marooned there, unable to get down from the plateau, which is high and dangerous, our four adventurers make camp with thorny bushes surrounding their encampment and start exploring the world. One of their first experiences is a beautiful grove where iguanodons disport themselves with their young, and then they find the rookery of the pterodactyls in a noxious swamp. Noxious. It's a great adventure story. They eventually map the land a little bit and realize that there is, as well as all the dinosaurs everywhere, which are a constant problem and source of delight for our scientists, we've got two main opposing characters. You've got a group of native Indians that are described as short and very red of skin, and there's a group of apes that are whitish, bristly, and not quite human, but not quite ape-like. So, on a brief diversion, there was a scientific hoax around for a while. I think it was Piltdown Man. And some people claim that Sir Arthur Conan Doyle perpetrated that hoax. That's it. It was Piltdown Man. I just checked the internet. Wikipedia, thank you so much. In 1912, there were counterfeit hominid fossils. Piltdown Man. This was a hoax that was ongoing for 40 years, and no one ever, I don't think, has discovered even today who perpetrated that hoax, but a hoax it was. And some people claim that Doyle perpetrated that hoax himself as a revenge on the scientific community who he had issues with later in life. And those people will claim that there are hints throughout the Lost World to the effect that Piltdown Man was a hoax in which Doyle was involved. So that's all very interesting. And some of those clues apparently lead to these white ape-like creatures who, after a few smaller altercations, end up kidnapping 3 of our 4 companions. They don't kidnap Malone, because Malone has done the one thing in this book that is absolute batshit crazy and which makes no sense. Him racing off to South America to impress some nasty girl, that makes sense. People do that sort of thing all the time. I mean, it doesn't make sense, but it's believable. Him getting up in the middle of the night in a reasonably protected camp, slipping out to go wandering through the jungle to the lake, through forests known to be haunted by man and everything else eating dinosaurs and other hazards, that makes no sense. Anyway, he does that. And on his return, he discovers that his 3 companions have been kidnapped. Now, I don't know if Doyle thought that he needed to give Edward Malone a bit more of an exciting narrative. I found it quite exciting enough. But maybe he thought he needed a little bit more I don't know, Robert Louis Stevenson-esque adventure. Anyway, Malone escapes being scooped up by the bad apes. Lord Roxton escapes, and the two of them go back to rescue their companions. That's a really, really fun adventure overall, which I'm not going to talk about anymore because I thought it was delightful. And I hope that many people watching this either also thought it was delightful or are going to read this and find it delightful, because I do thoroughly recommend it. If you want an adventure book that is more than a hint of science fiction in there, then The Lost World. You can't go past it. Beautifully written, did I mention? So after that, they end up joining with the Indians to make war on the apes. This encounter also solves the issue, the query of how the person underneath the cliff had died. They found the dead body of someone who had accompanied Maple White on his expedition, impaled on bamboo and with every bone in his body shattered. Now, personally, that was the only really naff part of science I thought about this, because if you're thrown off a cliff, every bone in your body being apparently shattered by people who find you a few years later, yeah, that sounds sensible. If you have been impaled on sharp bamboo that driven you down to the ground, I think that would have slowed you enough that you wouldn't actually shatter every bone in your body. You wouldn't survive and you wouldn't enjoy the experience, but those two things seemed a little bit incompatible to me. If anyone out there has made a study on people being thrown off cliffs and impaled on bamboo, do let me know if I'm wrong. I don't expect too many comments on that one. So having defeated the apes and being in the good graces of the local Indian tribe, they set their minds to trying to escape, during the course of their stay there, Malone gets a chance to tell us of the beauty of this land, the magic of the huge lake, with all its diverse zoology and dinosaurs, plesiosaurs, all the good things. It's like a licorice all sort of dinosaurs, that lake. Now, various characters are doing their own little explorations on the side, and they do eventually escape the plateau in a pretty cool way that I'm not going to talk about. They make their way back to England after this long stay away. And once again, they're confronted by the English scientific community, and specifically one particular character whose name I think it's something like Ilsworth. Anyway, he's a professor too. He's part of the scientific community, and he is the one thing that Professor Challenger and Professor Summerlee could ever agree upon. They both loathe him heartily, and when they get back to England, he challenges their account. Professor Summerlee was meant to settle the question of whether Challenger was lying or not. He's come back agreeing, but this Isle person doesn't agree that Summerlee is reputable. He doesn't agree with their photographs, claiming they're doctored, and he doesn't agree with anything, basically. So there's another large, acrimonious scientific debate. I think the notion of satire is pretty obvious there as well. And Professor Challenger silences this debate by bringing out a crate, opening it up, and a pterodactyl chick that he has carefully carried back emerges, flies around the hall, causes mass hysteria, and gets out an open window. It's a great culmination of the story. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle has a final exciting statement for us, as it turns out that every single member of this expedition is very wealthy. Say hello to your fans. You have fans. Look at all those people who are watching you. Not terribly interested. Oh well. There's a final footnote to the story, if you will, where everyone is now very wealthy, and Professor Challenger is going to use it to establish a museum. Lord John Roxton wants to use his share to get up another expedition back to South America to investigate the lost land further. And Edward Malone ends up taking his share to join Lord John Roxton instead of getting married to a silly twippet. Good choice, Malone, good choice. So, So much fun, so much joy. Now, one thing I love the encounters with the various dinosaurs, some of which aren't called that anymore, of course, because science changes. But the iguanodons were particularly great. We had various theropods. Allosaurus is mentioned, though in a strange context. And Stegosauruses, pterodactyls, plesiosaurs, ichthyosaurs, megaloceros. Maybe megalosaurus. A whole heap of different ones. And it's great. It's great for anyone who ever loved dinosaurs as a child. And like I said, with The Lost World, Arthur Conan Doyle hoped to do for the adventure story what Sherlock Holmes did for the detective. And he writes a little dedication which says, "I have wrought my simple plan if I give 1 hour of joy to the boy who's half a man or the man who's half a boy. I enjoyed every second of it. Not being either man nor boy should not distract from the enjoyment of The Lost World." The only argument I've got with my little copy here is that it doesn't have a prelude. I believe that when it was originally published, it was published in a magazine whose name I've forgotten, and there was a prelude that was meant to be something to do with Malone being legally challenged by Professor Challenger over his account, and that being withdrawn, something like that. So you had some sort of dedication. I can't remember what it was. Does the internet remember? The internet might remember. No, the internet isn't helping me out here. So yeah, this is a great early science book. It's a great science fiction book, and it is a beautiful, beautiful work of literature. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you have enjoyed The Lost World in the past, or will enjoy The Lost World in the future, and I would love if you would comment on it. Bye, and remember to read good books.